Round 12 of the candidates was played today, and as in the previous round, there were some very nervy decisions made. So first of all, let's take a look at the game between Hikaru Nakamura with white playing against Vishwanathan Anand. Anand, of course, sharing the lead going into this round with Caruana. So it's an English opening played by Nakamura, and this is the opening of choice in this tournament. I think because it's played because there are you don't get such forcing variations, and there is sort of new territory you can explore from a theoretical point of view. So we saw in previous rounds, for example, Caruana against Anand, this variation, and now e4, and this was very, very sharp, and Anand lost. Pretty bad game against Caruana, if you recall, in this variation, and so on. Eventually Caruana got a nice kingside attack. Today Nakamura played a little bit differently. He played knight d5 instead of bishop g2. But there were some similarities with that game, Caruana against Anand. So e4, now this has been seen before. The point of this is to push the knight to a worse square, so it goes to h4. This is actually quite an old variation. Now rook e8 is perhaps the most normal move, just to support the e-pawn. But d6 by Anand, well, this is a reasonable move. And previously, well, we've seen, for example, this has been played before, and after bishop e4, well, black certainly has some compensation for this pawn. Nakamura tried a new move today, a3. Push the bishop back, and then he just castled. Well, this seems quite reasonable. Notice this knight stranded at the edge of the board. So knights on the rim are dim, they say. Well, yeah, let's see. First thing we should note is that in this position, black can't really win that knight, can't trap it, because d4 is a good answer. And after this pawn is taken, of course, bishop g5. So Anand played rook e8, very sensible, just to support the e-pawn. Now, of course, d3 would be a very normal move to break down this pawn. But Nakamura played a very provocative move, e3. Now, a couple of ideas with this. Of course, you control the d4 square, so you might want to play b4 without allowing bishop d4. But also you close this diagonal, so that allows white to play f3, which is kind of interesting. But it's provocative because it allows Anand to win this knight with g5. You don't have to play like this. You could drop back with bishop b6 or maybe play a5, but incredibly Anand accepted the invitation and played g5. Now this move is either very, very good or very, very bad. Why? Because if this doesn't come off, then you've completely wrecked your king position. Nakamura played b4 and then bishop b2. So for the moment, black doesn't have time to take this knight because this knight on f6 is on prise. Anand exchanged. And now here the natural move would be to play knight e5, and this knight is still trapped at the side of the board. So why didn't Anand go for this? Well, it turns out that f4 is an incredibly strong move, and this Anand must have overlooked when he was, or at least let's say underestimated when he made his initial calculations with g5. So why is this so strong? Well, first of all, if this knight is taken on h4, then of course this is fantastic for white. The kingside is opened up. And if you take on f3, white saves the knight, and this pawn move is just an utter disaster. So the only way to justify this for black is to take the piece. So this is threatened and this is threatened. But white just trashes through here with this, and then queen h5, and this is a completely winning attack. Actually reminds me very much of Caruana's game against Anand, where Caruana sacrificed a piece on the king side and got a very strong attack. I mean, this is completely winning. This is threatened. If queen e7, then you take on e4 and queen f7 and g6. I mean, there's absolutely no defence here. In this position, queen g5 is possible, but bishop f6 looks very natural. And then, well, here's a calm move. King h1 steps out of a lot of trouble. And the idea is that if, for example, knight d2, then you play knight f5. I mean, this isn't a very difficult move, and after this is taken, this allows the queen to come out, and rook takes threatened, and also queen h6 and mate, so pretty simple. So this is the problem with knight e5. So Anand had to compromise, and he threw the knight into the middle. It does, again, remind me very much of his game against Caruana, where after Caruana's piece sacrifice of bishop h6, he returned a piece straight away. And the point is that if white takes this, then black takes on h4, and the position on the king side is more closed than the position we just looked at. I still think this is very strong for white, actually. You know, you can put a rook to the c file and put some pressure here. I think white's better. But the move Nakamura found in the game was so much stronger than this. Instead of taking this piece on d4, he first played pawn to d3. Excellent move. Now, why does he do this? Well, after Anand took on h4, instead of taking on d4, he took on e4 first. So all he wants to do is take this piece, but without damaging his pawns, and then black's king is just wide open. Now this is what happened. That knight can't escape because a4. So Anand brought the knight back, so Nakamura grabbed back the piece. So material is now even, and Nakamura just opened up the position. This is a really nice move. He's exploiting the pin, and he's opened up the diagonal for his bishop. Whoops, I misfired there, but this one, that's better, not that one. Anand exchanged and brought out the queen. He should probably play something like this to block off the bishop's diagonal, and Nakamura just has a huge positional advantage here. If you put a g-pawn there, then black will be okay, but I'm afraid in this position, clearly, in the long term, black's king is going to be in trouble. That's what Anand should play, but it's very interesting. He just kind of played on tilt here. Curious. And in this position, played h5. Now this is just not appropriate in the position at all. He should have played c6 to bring out his bishop on c8, and now Nakamura just played very straightforward moves. I mean, this is a really desperate attack from Anand, but there is no way this is going to succeed when Nakamura is just piling through the centre. And this is a very nice move from Nakamura, but somehow not a big surprise. He played queen c4. He just wants to attack black's king, so after bishop e6, for example, the queen just switches across, hits the rook, and there we go. Mate threatened, completely winning for white. So Anand played bishop g4, but he's utterly lost in this position. And queen f4 just swings across to the king side. Rook e5, good move, opening up this diagonal. Queen moved, and now bishop d6. Bishop e4. You could just take on b7, but this is completely winning. Anand resigned here. Terrible game for him. After the rook drops back, then rook g5, for example. King is wide open. You could keep attacking with bishop f6 or bishop e5. You could just take a pawn, so white wins a pawn. Desperate game from Anand. What about Caruana? Well, he played for 7 hours against Aronian. I mean, it's a fascinating game. I'm afraid I simply don't have time to go into that. Aronian was pressing the whole way, played very, very creatively, but Caruana finally managed to draw in a rook and pawn endgame. So Caruana survived. But that meant that, well, after Anand's loss, Karjakin, who was playing the back marker, Topalov, Karjakin had a chance to gain ground. He was only a half a point behind Anand and Caruana at the start of this round. So it was a Najdorf played by Topalov. And Karjakin played his h3 variation, which is currently very trendy. Now here d5 is a pretty safe move, but Topalov played into the sharpest variations. He allowed this kind of Keres attack, and this is extremely dangerous, even though White loses a whole tempo. In the Keres attack, of course, you're allowed to play h4 in one move, but even here, by playing this slow motion advance of the h-pawn, this is incredibly dangerous. Of course, it's still possible to play like this with black. I think, for example, knight b6 and knight d7, as Topalov played in the game, I think this is a reasonable way for black to play. But just to hang back with the king in the centre of the board, I think this is the best way to play. But Topalov castled, which he's done before actually. Here he played knight c6 against Vallejo, but lost that game. Vallejo played an excellent game. He just allowed these pawns to roll down the board. I mean, Karjakin is not doing anything particularly original here. We've seen this many, many times before. And here he played g6. And Topalov looked very confused here. But, okay, the point of g6, again, as I said, this is not original. The point is to undermine the e6 pawn. Here's a nice variation. If knight c5 to support this pawn, rook g1 is an interesting move, and typical of this kind of position. So you allow black to take on e4, and then you take here, and if king takes to support that e6 pawn, I'm afraid it doesn't work because there's a rook g7 check, and then knight takes e6. Okay, I'm playing very badly for black, but it just shows the typical tactics here. So the point of g6 is to open up lines. Toppy played knight e5. Castles from Karjakin. Queen e2. And now rook c8 is a pretty bad move. I think bishop f6 you have to play here to hold g7 and try to hold the king side for a moment. But after rook c8, h6 is, well, it's a crushing move actually. But again, not outrageously surprising. So if pawn takes on g6, you simply open up the h file, and queen f3, swing the queen over. I mean, I think this is almost lost already. In the game, Toppy took on g6 and allowed knight takes e6, and Karjakin simply took an exchange, opened the h file, played bishop d4, eliminated this dangerous bishop, and he was just an exchange up for nothing with a winning position. A very strange game by Topalov, I have to say. So, with 2 rounds to go, Caruana and Karjakin lead with 7 points. Anand is a half point behind on 6.5. In the next round, Caruana plays against Svidler with white. I think that's Caruana's big chance. Aronian plays white against Karjakin. I think Caruana has to go for it in the next round because he has a worse tiebreak score than Karjakin. But they do play, Caruana and Karjakin actually face each other in the final round. So it's still wide open, but looking like either Caruana or Karjakin are going to win the tournament. But let's see. Rest day tomorrow. They play the penultimate round on Sunday. Till then.